Now we have a little time for some questions for all four papers, if you have some. Is there anybody who wants to start? Gabby, do we have an extra microphone or?
Hi, Thank you very much for last presentations. I'd like to ask you there. You did spoke about why Howard Carter was not recognized in UK, while in the US, as far as I know, he was very well received and his conferences were very publicized. Meanwhile, in UK, it was very, very silent till his end. Would you mind to elaborate about this? Because was he coming from the wrong side of the street, just that? Or, and that explains the difference between US and UK? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There is an enormous difference between both, and I believe if one does one thing, almost the other does the other thing. I believe that in that time, the idea of archaeologist are two ideas of archaeologists. The archaeologist that is the cultural historical archaeologist that work in that region, and there is the transition of the prehistorical archaeologists from France. And I believe that transition in the UK and in Europe is viewed in a more flattering light than the other. But more than that, I believe that you put the question exactly on what it is. It's one side views in that light, the other. There are two different traditions. I can't elaborate much more because I believe that you answered the question by giving it the two sides of the coin.
Thank you very much. I have a question for the Pierre Lacour archive. I found it very, very interesting what you reported and very significant. So I have actually two questions. First of all, are there any kind of comparable archive materials in Egypt? Because for me, it's really surprising that we have it in France and not in Cairo. And the second question is, I very much was interested in the kind of chronology of the you presented regarding the concessions that were granted, because in the work of Bénédicte Savoy, who studied the archive regarding Ludwig Borchardt, she made it really clear that Lacour kind of tried to put an end to any archaeological work by Les Boches, by the Germans, and that, at least as I understood her work, that Lacour deliberately spread the rumors to the Cairo press that Borchardt was cheating with the find of Nefertiti. So my question is regarding, are there any indications that concessions went to different countries, so to say, or to specific countries? And if there is any hints that that he was in contact with the press, so to say, to put pressure also on Carter. So.
Thank you so much for this question. So about the first thing about were concessions attributed to various countries, that is actually the very question I'm trying to answer in my PhD, so I'm not done yet. But yeah, the idea is to try and answer that question thanks to the minutes of the meetings of the Comité d'Égyptologie, because that's when the concessions were granted. So they presented the requests and they were granted or not. And actually, I began this research thinking, indeed, that the political context impacted those decisions. And what's really interesting is to see that actually, not so much. It does happen, but it is the exception rather than the rule. Because usually there is...
So
first of all, in the... Thank you so much for this question. So about the first thing about were concessions attributed to various countries, that is actually the very question I'm trying to answer in my PhD, so I'm not done yet. But yeah, the idea is to try and answer that question thanks to the minutes of the meetings of the Comité d'Égyptologie, because that's when... Great. Perfect. So yeah, usually what's interesting is that the Comité d'Égyptologie actually was composed of members of various nationalities. So there were people from the Egyptian who were working for the Egyptian government, but they were British people, obviously, and there were French people working for the government. And it's actually very interesting to see that even French men working in this committee have talk about foreigners when they talk about countries that are not Egypt. So they consider themselves as working for Egypt. So, for example, the French Charles de Roccassera says, "Oh, we shouldn't allow foreigners to come to our meetings," and he's actually French, but he's talking about people that are not Egyptian. So it's much more nuanced than just the nationalities of each actor, and so usually, from what I've seen from my first results, there is no favoritism. Usually, it does happen sometimes. And so then you asked the question about the Germans.
The contact with the journalist, and if he used the press to put pressure on the contract negotiation.
Did LACO use the press to put pressure on the contract negotiation? No, I don't think. I think LACO, if he could, was trying to avoid any contact with the press as much as he could. So I don't think he used that to put pressure. However, it is often said that LACO, of course, was very, after World War I, was very anti-German. But actually, the Germans were really shocked and surprised that when they asked for new concessions after all of them were cancelled during World War I, LACO did receive them, and of course the problem of Nefertiti was a kind of leverage, like you won't have any new concession as long as you keep the Nefertiti bust in Berlin. That was more or less the problem here. And so I don't know if that answers your question, right? Okay. And for the other question about the archives.
Is there kind of additional archive material for this question?
Yes, so the reason why these archives are in Paris are because these are LACO's personal archives. His wife gave them to l'École pratique des hautes études in Paris after he died. So this is why, as a former director of the service, they are there. But in Egypt, I mean, there are probably archives of the Service of Antiquities. I think for now it's a bit difficult to know exactly which one and to access them, but yes, there are probably documents over there also. That must be very interesting.
Okay, the last question.
It's a question to Laila, please. If I remember well, there is this big debate if the south wall was independently painted from the rest of the tomb, because it's very clear that you can paint the sarcophagus chamber perfectly well when there are no shrines, and then they put in the shrines. And the question was, if I remember well, if the entire south wall was painted only at a point when the shrines were already in place, or if only the portion which you have now wonderfully reconstructed was painted later, which it had to be because it wasn't built yet, the wall. I once looked at this question. I once looked very carefully at the corner, what you can do as a tourist when you enter the tomb and you look down into the burial chamber. You can see the corner, and I found that there was a very small portion of plaster over yellow paint. So that's the reason why I gathered that the other portion of the south wall had already been painted, or at least yellow. The background was yellow painted before they added this portion of the wall. And then, if I remember well, Carter, doesn't he mention that he has seen splashes of paint at the shrines? And there my question is, do you know at what part of the south wall these splashes were? Were they further in the western part, so the rock part, or were they further in the built-up part, which you have now reconstructed?
Well, I think originally that figure was indeed painted on stone. And then I think it was taken down when that wall was moved back, but then the scene was incomplete. So they had to repaint it. And probably that's when the splashes got onto the shrine. But I don't remember anything from Carter's notes saying where on the shrine the splashes were.